And what happened is they had a bit of an issue with the firing of the rockets to establish the orbit. And what happened is it sort of made a big elliptical path, just as you see over there on the right side. And what did that do for us? It gave us contact. He's talking about minutes of passes on these low Earth orbits. But this one provided hours of contact because of the orbit. I used to work back to the States, VHF, UHF, all the time in the UK. Got lots of contacts from them. And it's a period, what's in 699.5 minutes. So there's like 12 hours.
12 hours.
Of contact ability. And this is, although it sounded really complicated, it's relatively easy once you have the rig set up. I guess the newer rigs were a little better, but because this was much more stable, you're not having to struggle to get close.
So it's still available?
Unfortunately, some inactive. It's a bit quiet. I think it went dead
Not too long ago, really.
Yeah.
It lasted a long time.
a few years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. This was one of their original phase 3.
Right.
Longer.
Next one.
Okay.
Oh, one thing I...
Yeah, I thought you wanted to talk about that.
Go ahead on to the next one.
Okay.
This was built with off-the-shelf items. The solar panels came from Radio Shack. So they matched they got the best ones and they returned the other ones back to Radio Shack. I don't know on that one. And let's see, it was, oh yeah, Jan Kane led the project, and they ran the satellite with an aircraft to be able to test it. Now, Vince was speaking about the software that's available today to use to track it. HRD has it, there's all kinds of ways. And Vince has the new super duper one. I did this with an Atari 800. Bulletin board downloading the ephemeral data from office. So it's not really that overwhelming, especially now it's much easier to do it. It's just click on the radio. You can just have it automatically download the data. Basically, that's all I got. It was a unique type of satellite as well. And I don't know what they changed it today to like 85. It's
805 is much, yeah, smaller. They're talking about doing some larger ones. Thanks, Vince.
So I guess you can use a Raspberry Pi to do it.
Or apparently an 8-bit computer, which is awesome. We humbly have to admit that that's pretty cool. One thing that jogged my memory while we were talking about this Molnoya orbit, it's kind of a neat orbit. Like you said, because it has to slow down, sweeps out, the same amount of area, so it slows down. This is, a huge slice of pizza versus these small slices of pizza, so they're very narrow. They go really slow. This satellite will whip around here on these broader things, and then very slowly come and almost linger here for hours and hours and hours. This is actually, 2 of these set up were actually what established the hot link between the USSR and the United States back in the 70s, even the 60s after the Cuban Missile Crisis, before they had undersea fiber links, etc. So that's pretty neat. I mean, so you were talking home, especially back then when AT&T was charging who knows what to, long distance from Europe to, yeah. So what else can we do? Obviously, we can just watch these satellites. Some of them get bright enough that you can actually see it, which I think is pretty cool. If you don't want to transmit, you can still get cheap enough things that you could actually listen, or you could geek out and learn about all of this stuff, the physics of it, or any of that, the predictions. So like you said, it's not that hard. It's basically basic a bunch trigonometry when you ignore all of the other influences on the satellite and just assume the Earth and the satellite are there. You can download real-time weather images. I've got examples of that coming up. There's the digipeater on the ISS, other than just the voice stuff, also just has AX25 packet, so the old packet stuff. And some of you may be familiar with APRS. It just sends out position information, string over packet. You can forward that through the ISS, actually, and that's kind of a lot of fun. You can be out in the field, send a packet up to the ISS, go back on the internet, and pull up the fact that you're now on a map, because there are gateways that then put your APRS information on on the map, which is kind of fun. Data and telemetry to see what the satellite itself is telling you about itself, which might be of interest. Or you can have your conversations, like we were saying. So there are actually contests for these things as well. Worked all states you can actually get with these satellites, which is kind of cool to think about. Worked all states at 70 centimeters. There's also an ATV transponder on the ISS, and it's still kind of in planning stages to actually send imagery in the future. A couple examples of that. AO85, this is data under voice telemetry. You can see that nice eye diagram. So basically it's just, I believe it's just frequency shift keying on PL tones or CTSS tones. So they're subaudible frequencies that we can't hear that the PLL locks onto, and it actually sends a very low rate data. There's also GMSK 9.6 telemetry if you're interested in that. You can't see it here, but this was data that I actually grabbed from that was telling me how hot the satellite was, how fast it thought it was rotating based on its gyros that it had on board, things like that. On the right, something completely different, an Iridium flare. So Iridium is a low Earth orbit collection of satellites for satellite phones. So they're nice and close, there's not as much path loss, so you can put a small handheld battery powered thing and actually talk through it. There's a whole bunch of them. They utilize these phased array antennas that are highly polished aluminum that they glint just beautifully in the sun if you catch them just right. And there's predictions that show when that'll happen. These things get up to -8. So if you think about Venus as the nice bright star after the sun is set, recently you've probably seen it lingering over there. These satellites get 100 times brighter than Venus, so you can actually watch them. They're very quick. They flare for maybe 20 seconds wide or something. What I did here was I held open the camera shutter for about 30 seconds and caught the whole flare. And so you can go see these. You better hurry because they're launching replacements for Iridium and those things won't flare. There are other satellites that will flare. Here's an example of what this is the low data rate stuff that a normal VHF receiver can tune to and grab. This is 60 kilohertz wide, narrowband FM, in a 136 megahertz realm. You capture the data and then put this over into the program that will actually take, there's a carrier tone that is then AM modulated that you can get all of this data. This was at my old QTH. This is here. Just 2 days ago, we captured that one in the backyard. Depending on what sensors are active, you can do formulas. The software did it for me, and it'll actually show you temperatures of the clouds or of the water or how much vegetation there is growing. This isn't false color added by the mapping software. This is actual calculation between two different multispectral sensors, as they call them. The QSL card on the right there came from the ISS. The Russians were doing a commemorative thing of Yuri Gagarin's 60th anniversary. I think it was last year. Downlinked that with an RTL SDR dongle. So what do you need, speaking of the RTL dongle? So I've worked over a dozen of these things with just VX7R, little handy talkie. Okay, over a dozen states and even Canada. Or if you're just interested in getting your feet wet and you don't want to go whole hog into this thing, use an RTL dongle. So I've got this here because of that horrible tower that I showed you. But you don't necessarily need a filter out front. This is a cheap LNA I got off eBay for $20. I had to put an attenuator, in fact, because it was a little too good. And then the RTL dongle, which is like, what, 15 bucks? So all told, if you wanted to go deluxe with it, you've got $50 to $300 to do a lot of the stuff back here. You could do this on receive only, this. Of course, you don't need any radios for that. All of this is receive only. All right, but seriously, what do you need? Well, you don't necessarily need this guy. That's NASA's Deep Space Network, although then again, I don't know, depending on how the vote goes and how willing you are, I could definitely use one of these. So actually, we've got everything you need down at the main plant. Now, the radio that we have will do satellites, but you should see a pro do it, and I am not. Wyatt did it, and it was like, whoa, tune this and manually turn this one and tune the offset and barely hear it, and there was so much going on there, but you can do it. Yeah, oh yeah, he was pointing the antenna when it would lose, and he was tuning offsets, and he was calling out for call signs. But we have what you need. We've got dedicated high gain antennas. We've got rotators to move them. We've got warmth because you're not standing outside freezing like you are with these setups. So come and enjoy, right? antennas that we put up are new. They're circularly polarized, new to at least Rockwell Collins Amateur Radio Club, just installed a few months ago, right? So they're there, please come down and use them. But if you're going to upgrade your home setup, based on this thing, here's the list that I would give you. First of all, you want a full duplex transceiver. You need to hear on 2 meters and transmit on 70 centimeters or vice versa. And you need to preferably do that in the same rig, because you want to be able to hear your own downlink, and it's hard to switch between two different things. You definitely want a diplexer or dedicated antennas for each one of those, so you don't have to deal with that. These are completely different things. My uplink on this homebrew thing, I should have said, was a cubicle quad. This was a tree stake, and then these bolt on there, and it happens to match at 50, but that was a 2-meter antenna. So with this guy I could hear, but I couldn't transmit with that one, and that got pretty trying, frankly. Then if you've got access to a highly directive antenna, that's only going to help. But then now you're going to be trading gain for look angle, and so you're going to have to maybe want to start steering it. So I would say then you want an antenna rotator, but that's kind of actually at the bottom of the list, because if you can't hear them, you can't work them. And usually I would say even 5 watts is overkill. I've heard people get through on a watt getting up to these satellites. It's the downlink usually that limits you. You just can't understand. There's a lot of static and QRM to deal with. And then circular polarization, because believe it or not, with a linearly polarized antenna, you can tilt it. You're just doing it a lot because it's kind of random. So here's kind of how it works in practice when we get to the demo. Before, you're going to go get past predictions, why it's already done that. It's going to tell you when and where the satellite's going to rise. It's going to tell you roughly how fast it's going to transit, and then when and where it's going to set, okay? Because you're going to want to point the antenna with it. You're going to open your squelch fully so that you can hear very quiet signals. Set your IF filter so that you're not letting in more noise than you need. And then tune for your expected downlink, and remember, calculate the Doppler shift that you're expecting to see. You're going to then, at the acquisition of satellite, point your antenna to that direction and slowly start rotating if you don't have circular polarization, and start listening for quieting, where you're actually starting to hear the carrier, your FM capture on what this satellite is actually relaying for you. All right, so now you've got it, and hopefully you can just follow and track. You're going to wait for a pause here. You're going to retune and keep pointing as needed. If we get the radio that we're proposed, all of this is going to be taken care of for you, and you're just going to wait for a break. You've got potentially thousands of ham operators in that footprint, right? And you've got about 15 minutes from horizon to horizon to work it. So when you finally get in, it's going to be quick and efficient, at least in theory. I put the in theory because, and here I'll go griping again, but I had this great pass. It was going over, and I was just barely on the edge of it at my QTH in Colorado, and I heard a guy in Alaska, and I couldn't wait to answer, but somebody else got to him first, and they started going, "What's the weather like up there this year?" And darn if he didn't come back and say, "Well, it hasn't snowed yet, blah, blah, blah." And I couldn't break in at all because I just had my little VX7R. It's like, you got to be kidding me. And finally, there was a pause. I threw out my call sign, and I heard a 6 station come back and lost the satellite. Oh, man, I needed that state. So what you will hear is something a little bit more like this. So I was on AO51 at the time. I actually pulled this out of the log. I brought the QSL card. If you're curious, this was a guy in Ohio, and I was in Colorado at the time. And I go AO51 KI6ASW Delta Mike 78, which was my grid square, telling him where I was. KI6ASW, this is W9VNE Echo Mike 79. W9VNE and Echo Mike 79, this is KI6ASW Delta Mike 78 QSL. KI6ASW Delta Mike 78, this is W9VNA, thanks for the QSO, and then it's done. We've efficiently exchanged where we were, and that we definitely heard each other. And so that's kind of as quick as it'll happen. And if you're really good and efficient at this, you might get 3, 4, maybe even a dozen of those in per pass. But there'll be other people coming in, I guarantee it. So during, if you're also curious about the way this stuff is working, you can actually start playing with this and seeing how the polarization can affect you. Or you can actually watch the brighter satellites as you're following them and point away and hear it, which I think I always get a kick out of doing stuff like that. If you've got a waterfall plot, you can actually watch the Doppler shift take effect and see that center carrier creep across and see that you'd have to retune. And then some of the coolest stuff happens on these lower passes. You start seeing all sorts of weird stuff that usually doesn't dominate, like Fresnel zones, ducting, all sorts of strange stuff in that a lot of times I've noticed the satellite will set, it'll go strong and then weak and strong and weak like a knife edge diffraction pattern, and then it'll set and I think it's over. And then it comes back really strong for a little while, you know, it's like below the horizon. I always think that is just so cool. All right, so let's say you're hooked. Last slide. Where do you want to go from here? You know, again, AMSAT, this is a neat little online, probably the least amount of fuss. You don't need to even look up your grid square or anything to get past predictions. ARISS is actually amateur radio on ISS aficionados. ARISS.net is the APRS plotting of all the stuff that has just been heard. Heavens Above do a lot more predictions, a lot higher fidelity. CalSky is the calculated sky, does all sorts of cool stuff like when the ISS is going to pass in front of the moon so you can get a nice image, high contrast image of it. Cedar-astronomers.org, I can't not put a plug into that. I'm the president of the local astronomy club. Come check us out and we'll be more than happy to tell you all about satellites. GPredict is a free graphical prediction and plotting software that you can download. Stellarium is a night sky kind of thing that'll actually pull in satellite TLEs and put the orbits against the stars that they should go. And Celestrak actually grabs all the TLEs from the Air Force and makes them available to the public, and that's how we actually get these predicts. So that concludes the presentation part. I guess we are technically 20 minutes before the pass. Maybe it's time, I don't know how you want to do it, Charlie, but maybe it's time to do the talk, and I can take questions if you'd like. Yeah. Any questions? Rodney.
You hinted at it, but it sounds like there's an effort to have stationary satellites at some point, and I'm assuming that would then mean you could do relays. And so therefore you would always have contact with anybody in the world? There are
the phase 3 proposals have been as wild as putting satellites in orbit around Mars to try to do some of the forward thinking. We're going to have, you know, civilizations on Mars or whatever. We're going to relay back from them. We basically ride share and get a ride up however we can in the amateur satellite world. And so if there was a GeoBird that was willing to take along a ham radio satellite, I'm sure AMSAT would jump at the opportunity.
Okay, but that's not yet in place, correct?
There are, AMSAT, like any other organization, wants to do these decade-away plans, and so they do have plans to do geosynchronous or even the Mars, the very long interplanetary.
Okay, but planning.
Yeah.
Not yet implemented.
No, I don't believe there's any ride share like, you know, a rocket or a mission that has agreed to host us. And a lot of times those, like Vince was saying, a lot of times those satellites get very complicated because the launch vehicle will put you into a highly elliptical orbit, and it's up to you to circularize the orbit. Well, now you got to have propulsion on board, and that gets very expensive and complicated, and it might blow up, and the guy who's ride sharing doesn't want somebody who might blow up to share with him. So, yeah. Yes?
Do the programs that do the radio tuning, are they able to take care of the Doppler?
Absolutely. It'll go through and pre-calculate based on just the whole geometry of it, and then if your radio has the interface, it's one of the issues I think with our older radio. It'll sit there and retune the radio for you, and you don't even have to think about it.
Outstanding.
Yep. Thank you.
You set off the alarm if you open that door.
No, go. Yes.
He'll let you out.
Yep, you.
Low noise amplifier.
Low noise amplifier, yeah.
How would I get one of those?
So I went on eBay and just typed, because for these RTL SDR dongles, hopefully everybody knows what that is, but they figured out one of these tuner peripherals that you plug into your TV and you can watch TV on it, could actually tune way outside of the TV bands, and it just presents an IF. And then the computers are fast enough to take all that IF and digitally do all your signal processing, demodulation, anything you want to do. So fantastic, like $15. And then this whole cottage industry has sprouted up to do all sorts of cool stuff like tracking airplanes using the 1090 ADS-B stuff. So type in RTL-SDR LNA, and I think a bunch of cheap ones. Might be Slow Boat from Asia.
Those for plug it into IF in your rig and make it a pan adapter using those.
It's a lot like the Flex 5000, but nowhere near as cool because the sensitivity is lousy, so you will want an LNA. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Okay, so we come to the question. Should we upgrade the radio, the 30-year-old radio, in the club station? You want to make a motion to do that? About $2,300. We have $11,800 in the kitty right at the moment.
So moved.
Okay, it has been moved that we make the purchase. Any seconds?
I'll second.